when we were broke. Here's how we got $10,000 saved. Our income didn't go up. Our income was actually less than it was in the previous years.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Jeff Heilman Project, your go-to podcast for systematizing success. Over the last 30 years as entrepreneurs, we have some systems that we have put in place in order to maintain and keep this ship a-rolling. And that's what we talk about here on the Jeff Heilman Project. Today's topic is going to be on budgeting. I think the best template, we've been using the Ramsey template for allocating of expenses. If there's one thing you got to give Ramsey props for, it's templates.
Here's what Ramsey does great. McDonald's does not have the best burgers. They have the best system for delivering burgers to humanity.
Every time.
It is predictable, and they do the best job of serving the masses.
Yes, agreed.
Is it somewhere I want to go? No more than once a day if I can help it. There are other ways of skinning a cat. I love what Tony Robbins says, where he's like, look, if you're not getting the results that you want, go to the people that have what you want and find out what they do. And then recognize that proximity is power. That's the rule that he got from the richest man in Canada, worth $6 billion. Proximity is power. Now, not all of us can go to work for Elon Musk. What we can do with regard to proximity is listen to what they say. Tim Cook was on CBS Morning. What he talked about was a conversation he had where Steve basically calls Tim over to the house. And he says, I want you to be CEO. And Tim's like, are you sure you don't want to be CEO? Because at that point, Tim thought that Steve would live a long time. And Steve basically had reconciled himself to his fate. And he says, no, you're going to be the CEO. But there was an interesting thing about this. Tim said that Steve said to Tim in that meeting that from the time that he spent post-acquisition at Pixar, he saw a lot of changing of the guard at Disney to where it was all about, well, what would Walt do? And it created chaos during the transition of power. Because the CEO and the team would say, well, what would Walt do? Walt's not there to speak for himself. And so there's going to create some animosity in that process. And Steve said to Tim Cook, look, I don't want you to ask what would Steve do. That's death for the transition at the top. I just want you to do the right thing. Nobody knows what's right for you and your family except for you. If you're sitting there saying, what would Ramsey do or what would Robbins do? It's a good idea for training. But at the end of the day, you got to do what's right for yourself.
As far as a template for success goes, the concept of allocating your budget. Many people do not track where they're spending. I would challenge anybody to do it, to get a notebook and write down everywhere that you spend your money. And then sitting down and creating a budget based on how much you've actually got coming, being honest with yourself, seeing how much you're earning. And that can be a little variable if you're in something like commission sales or if you're an entrepreneur. But you should be able to take an average amount of what you make per month and then begin to allocate through different buckets and categories, things like electricity, utilities, phone, food, and making sure to create these individual buckets, if you will, for where your money's going to go, including and not limited to, and don't forget, things like for investing. If I would highly encourage anyone to take one of those categories for investing, and that could start out with just being investing in personal growth. I'm going to set aside $5 a paycheck, $10 a paycheck for a book or for a tape program or for Audible in the case of something, and making sure that you make that a line item in your budget.
When we look at wealth, we have to look at it through the same lens of anything else, which is it's identity first and then systems in place for budgeting. When we were broke, here's how we got started with budgeting. Number one, get yourself to a buffer. And I would say make it at least a week's expenses.
Having the money, the cash in the bank is possible by leveraging responsibly credit and debt. So if you're if you're in a season, in order to keep that $600 or $5,000 in your bank account in cash, you have to continue to only pay a minimum payment. By all means, keep your minimum payments consistent, because you're going to actually, the credit companies want to see you paying, they want to see it being paid down. You don't ever want to be maxed out if you can avoid it. But if you can continue to make a minimum payment, it is kind of one of those situations as you're getting a new job, as you're making interviews happen, as you're working to level up, you may be in a season to where you should choose to just make a minimum payment without paying the whole thing off entirely, because it's our belief you're going to get enough knowledge to where you're going to be able to up level your career. You're going to be able to, that business is going to be successful enough before you end up having to pay 3 times for the thing anyway. So if you're in a season to where you have to keep a minimum payment going, but have that liquid cash in the bank, keep the liquid cash in the bank.
If it's upside down and you've got $8,000 worth of income and $10,000 worth of bills, if you're making $8,000 a month and you've got no money in the bank and you've got $10,000 worth of bills, what do? You gotta prioritize and be willing to say no to stuff. So what I do is I take the $8,000 as if it were a ledger. I prioritize all the stuff that actually matters. So if we look at rent, electricity, gas, food, cash buffer, cell phone / communications, IRS, franchise tax board, if you got stuff like that, insurance, credit card, or other taxes. What's the most important thing? Now, I'm not going to put anybody in here on the spot. Most people would think rent is the most important thing. I disagree. Depending on what state you live in, they cannot kick you out of the house or the apartment or lock the doors or change the locks or whatever. They can't do that. It is against the law. All of the laws benefit the tenant, and yet the rent is, or the house payment is, the thing that you typically spend the most amount of money on. Electricity? Maybe electricity could be. What about gasoline for your car? It depends. Can you take the bus to where you need to go? You kind of have to work out that. I wouldn't say that. What about food? Yeah, food's important, but food can be manageable. What about a cash buffer? I think a cash buffer for unexpected is important. What about phone? What about water? What about insurance? What about credit card? What about IRS? First of all, you need to be able to communicate. If you cannot communicate for work, personally, number 1 is cell phone communication. Number 2, in my opinion, is actually electricity. You don't need electricity as much as you need your phone, because you can charge your phone somewhere else. But if the power gets cut off at your house, it gets tough to keep your food cold. Number 3 is car insurance, because you can drive your car without paying for it. You can find a way to get gas. But if you don't have insurance, you are at massive risk of not only breaking the law, but of being sued for hundreds of thousands of dollars by somebody if you were to hurt them or damage their property. So I think insurance is the next most important. And then what you do is you take it off the list. So you say, all right, let's say electricity is $500. That means $7,500. Let's say cell phone is $300. That gets you down to $7,200. Now you see what I'm doing? So let's say car insurance is $400 a month. That brings you down to $6,800. At least this way, you're doing it based on priority. I would say cash buffer. Got to have at least $300 cash buffer, because stuff is going to come up. That's not for Starbucks, by the way. That's for like laundromat if you need to wash your clothes. That gets you your cash buffer. Next, I would say, is gas. If you have a car, if you live east of the Mississippi, it's all public transit, or it can be, depending on if you live in the city. Number 5 would be gas. Number 6 would be water in your home. So gas is like $300 a month. $6,500, $300, that's $6,200. Let's say water's $200 a month. Now you've got everything, but you haven't paid for your car and you haven't paid for rent yet. You can renegotiate with the franchise tax board and the IRS, and I've done that. You can renegotiate with your credit cards. That's not a priority. You can renegotiate your car payment. You can renegotiate rent, but I wouldn't recommend it. Figure out what your minimum food. This is not fast food. Minimum groceries, like $200 every couple weeks. If you have a small family, maybe 300 to 400, a little bit bigger, maybe 500.
I could have my own episode on
how to do
grocery shopping.
So let's say food is $500 a month is like the minimum. We could probably feed this family on $500 every 2 weeks if we absolutely had to. $500 brings us down to $5,500. Let's say your rent is $3,000 a month. From $5,500, you're down to $3,000 a month. Now, what have you done by doing this? You have freed up $2,500 a month that is not going to car payments. It's not going to credit cards. It's not going to the IRS. It's not going to extra food. But you've got your rent paid, you've got your water, you've got your food, minimum food, you've got gasoline, you've got electricity, and you've got your phone. That's how I do it until you run out of money. And then the next month, stuff's coming. Well, guess what? Credit cards and IRS and franchise tax board are just going to have to wait because you can't be expected to not feed your family and clothe and house your family. As long as you communicate with them, they will back off. I promise you that. They're making so much money. All of the creditors, car payment, mortgages, credit card payments, IRS and franchise tax, what they make billions of dollars off of interest and penalties, they will wait. But at the same time, you also want to be doing the triple compounding. Invest in yourself, read books, take a walk, stay healthy, stay physically fit, figure out what your values are, and then work your buns off from an identity perspective to where you're protecting that intensity piece of it, and go work 2 jobs if you have to. I worked 2 jobs for years. I had times where I had 2 businesses and a job. I mean, we were doing multi-level plus professional golf plus startup work effort, like 80, 90 hours a week
And I
for
can honestly
years
say
and years and years.
the way we were able to sleep at night was because we
I
had
peace of mind.
budget.
Yep.
And because we knew where the money was going. Ladies, it can probably sound like a 4-letter word. Please, gentlemen, if you're wanting to have a budget conversation with your wife, take her out, wine and dine her a little. Use whatever charisma you've got that you landed her in the first place. If you're heavy-handed and if you go into it legalistically and be like, this is the way it's going to be, and it's not going to be a very peaceful conversation. But if you can help cast a vision of where you're going, what the future looks like, the amount of peace of mind, maybe the fact that you speak to her in a way to say, hey, I'm going to budget for you to have $40 a week that you can spend on whatever you want. I'm going to make sure to include you and you getting to go out with your girls or you getting to have some little Target money. We're going to put that into the budget. If you start out with that and then go into all of the ways that things have got to change, she will be a lot more agreeable with you, because that's what the budgeting should never feel like it's heavy-handed. It should feel freedom. It should be easy. This is a light burden to have to carry, because if you appropriately budget, it should bring peace. It should bring joy. It should bring like, hey, I've got an extra $5 this week. Who can I bless with it? Hey, I'm budgeting giving. I'm budgeting getting to buy books. That's in my budget. Like making budget fun, making budget something that you can do joyfully is our goal and our attempt.
You and I have gone out and split a piece of cheesecake.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be a huge spend, but you do want to get your mindset, and this goes into identity and state, right? It's right back to Winstack. Again, if your identity is that someday, some way, somehow, there's going to be an abundance. The reason why we have abundance is because we don't spend every single dollar that we make.
Agreed.
Because when you go into credit card, $20, $30, $50, $100,000 of credit card debt you can't pay off, when you buy cars you can't afford, when you don't stick to the budget, you are absolutely destroying your family's peace of mind. And to the degree that you can discipline yourself on the front end by sticking to a budget, you can enjoy peace. And our budget conversations now are 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And you've done a great job, by the way.
Thank you.
Sticking with the budget. The conversations do not have to last that long. In the beginning, is there fighting and gnashing of teeth? There sure can be if we're just used to a free-for-all. A number of years ago, getting to the point where I'm like, I cannot keep working 100 hours a week and we have nothing to show for it. Like, I just can't. I can't be motivated to do that. Let's just burn everything to the ground and go live in our car, because I would rather do that than be making all this money and just be bleeding out of every orifice to where we have nothing at the end of every month, and I have to pay a price for a lack of self-discipline in the area of finances. And as soon as we pivoted from that, I remember within like 3 or 4 months, we had $10,000 saved. And it was the first time we'd had to, and our income didn't go up. Our income was actually less than it was in the previous years. We just started living on a budget instead of living based on what the bank account had in it. And that mental shift of just holding yourself accountable to a budget, regardless of if you got $5 in the bank, $5,000 in the bank, or hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank, you will eventually start to build a float. And then that float will start compounding through the triple compounding area of investing in yourself, investing in side hustle, and then investing in fixed assets, real estate, other people's businesses that they run as owner operator, securities, bonds, etc. I do take a pretty hard line on some of these things, because Look, I used to be homeless. Okay. I had very little discipline. And I would say that I'm probably still that kid who can't really pay attention for more than 5 or 10 minutes. But I've learned how to break things down into bite-sized pieces. When I look at investment banking for a 12-year-old, I really mean it. I want people to understand that if you have a box and inside that box you are multiplying a, like bacteria multiply when they're in a petri dish. If you can multiply money and learn how money works and learn how money compounds, you can get yourself out of this whole getting up and going to work. If you want to work really hard at something, great. I hope you do work really hard at it, and it's because you enjoy it, not because if you don't, your family doesn't get to live indoors. We hope that you are prosperous and successful in everything that you do, and we're here to help you along the way. Have a great rest of your week.